Ezra. Okay, let's see, 10 o'clock. Okay, we can begin. The Gemara that we learned yesterday we started on 27a and we continued on 27b. So the Gemara talked about the four Mishmaros that came up to Eretz Yisrael with Ezra during the time that they were going to build the second Beis Hamikdash, and they did build it. And the problem was that not all 24 mishmaros, not all 24 groups came up to Eretz Yisrael, only four of them. And they basically, those four were divided into 24. They divided these four families into 24 groups. And they had to deal with the fact that over time they expected that others would come back as well. And the problem was, what was the order? And ultimately, they made a goyrol in general to figure out within those four groups. They divided them into 24. So the order exactly of how those extra groups, in other words, each group was divided into six. So what was the order of those? And then ultimately, when the other groups of the Mishmaros were to come back, they would fit them in, but not in their initial place. Like the first one was not going to get Yehoyariv was not going to get the first Mishmar because he lost his opportunity. He didn't come right away. And when he does come, so Yedaya will stay in his place, which means he gained the priority being first. And Yehoyariv will have to be secondary to Yedaya. That's basically how the order, this is sort of like gives us an understanding of how the order was of these Mishmaros and how they would do the service in the Beis Hamikdash. How was it said? We spoke a little about how one of those names, Pishchar, Rashi is bothered with the fact it's not one of the names of the Mishmaros. There's a list of all the Mishmaros, all 24. Pishchar doesn't seem to be one of them. So we said that maybe they had two names, and maybe or possibly Pishchar was still alive, and Pishchar's father was the name of the Mishmar initially, but that he passed away, and now Pishchar was still alive in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. You have to understand that there were people that were alive in the time of both, because it was only 70 years in between the first Beis Hamikdash and the second. So some people remembered the first Beis Hamikdash, and they were there. So Pishchar was probably alive in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, and they decided to just rename his Mishmar on his name instead of the name that it initially was, maybe his father's name. Anyway, the Gemara continued and talked about the discussion of the Gemara continued and talked about the Ma'amados. The Ma'amados, meaning the prayers that were done by the Israelites who were representing the community. And it talked about they read Maisa Bereshis, they read creation about each of the days, they read about the creation of the world, even though seemingly, what's the connection between praying for the sacrifices and creation of the world? It seems like it's a whole different topic. And the Gemara says that no, Ma'amados, if not for the Ma'amados, the whole world wouldn't exist. That this is the creation of the world is so connected to the sacrifices and the Ma'amados, the prayers for over those sacrifices, so to speak, the prayers of the people. The entire world exists only because of this. And so it's apropos for the Ma'amados to recite the verses, to read in the Torah And then at Mincha and then at the other prayers, the different opinions exactly which other, it was Mincha and Ne'ilah, but they would read even by heart. They would read these verses. Now, the Gemara here says it gives a whole it expounds on this on the bris bein habesarim, the story of the covenant that Hashem made with Abraham. And it has to do with the fact that it fits right in over here, because it has to do with the fact that if the whole world only exists because of the Ma'amodais, because of these representatives of the community who were praying on behalf of the community and connection and in relation with the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices. So if that's so, then what about if there's no Beis Hamikdash? We don't have the Beis Hamikdash, so how does the world exist? So it fits right in over here. So Avram had told Hashem, his first claim was, maybe the Yidden are going to sin before you and you're going to destroy them. And on that, Hashem answered that, no, I'm not going to. So he says, Bama Eda ki irashena. How am I going to know that that they will be saved and they will inherit it? In other words, how are they going to be atoned for their sins? So he says, bring me 3 calves and 3 goats, and they brought offerings. And that idea implies that the offerings are atonement. But then Avram asks further, and he says, well, what about if there's no Beis Hamikdash? In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, fine. But if there's no Beis Hamikdash, how is that? How will they have atonement? So Hashem said, I already established the Seder Korbanos, the laws, the order of the sacrifices. They read it before me. I'm going to consider it as if they brought those sacrifices, and I'll forgive them for their sins. And the commentaries struggle a little. Where do you see this in the verse? Rashi over here, which I've mentioned before. The question is if this is really Rashi or maybe a student of Rashi. The tractate Taanis, the Rashi here is a little different. It seems different if you read it. So commentaries want to say that it's really must be a different comment, or maybe a student of Rashi or someone that wrote it. But anyway, Rashi over here says that where do you get this? Where do you see this in the verse? Where is this hinted to? In other words, most of these type of traditions are, at least it even sounds like it's going along the verses. So where does this hinted to? The Maharsha has an insight about how it's hinted to, because it uses the word Bama Eda ki irashena, and Hashem initially was saying about giving it to them, and not the term irashena, inheritance, and the fact that it changes and switches the term to inheritance. It's from the same word as yoirishena, which means when you're kicked out of the land. And so, in other words, what's going to happen when we're kicked out of the land? And on that, the Hashem says, "Kachli." Kach is like "Kachui machem dvarim," that it means words. That if you say the verses, it's considered as if you brought these sacrifices. So that's basically this discussion here is clarified with the fact that Ma'amodais are extremely important, even if we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, but we can still bring these sacrifices because we say the verses about the sacrifices as if we brought the sacrifices. Hashem forgives us. The famous question on this Gemara is that there's a Gemara in Shabbos that talks about Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, and it talks about the not touching the not reading by the light of a candle, because you might end up Shema Yate. Maybe you will, move the wick in order to burn better and see better, and it'll ultimately you'll be over. You'll transgress the prohibition on Shabbos and burning mavir. And anyway, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha once did that. He read by the light of the candle, and he ended up by mistake. He forgot it was Shabbos and moved the wick, and he said he wrote on in his book, in his diary, that when Mashiach comes, he's going to have to bring a chatos shmena, a fat, like a special chatos, a fattened chatos, an animal, a sin offering. And so the question is, why do you have to write down that he's going to bring a sin offering when Mashiach comes? In other words, he was keeping track of how many, keeping track that he's going to need to bring a sin offering. It doesn't seem to fit with our Gemara. Our Gemara says, all you got to do is say the pasuk. You say the verse is about sin offerings. It's as if you brought the sin offering. So why do you have to write it down? Just say the verses. So on a very simple level, it could be explained that although it's as if you brought the sin offering, it's only as if. It's not exactly the same. As if you did a sin and need to bring a sin offering, you could say the verses. That's great. But it's as if you brought a sin offering, but it's not perfect. It's not exactly as if a person brought a sin offering, and you still would need to bring an actual offering. Just Hashem will give you credit. So that's one way of understanding it. But there's another way of there's another interpretation here, and that is that the Gemara mentions in other places in Kodshim, in the discussion about sacrifices. It mentions there that the Koyanim oichlim, the Koyanim eat the sacrifice, and the owner gets atonement. The bailim miskaprim. So one of the commentaries wants to say over here an interesting little insight. He says, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha needed to bring a sacrifice. Now, he said the verses. It's as if he brought the sacrifice. But you also need the Koyanim to eat from the sacrifice. When the Koyanim eat from the sacrifice, it says the owners gain atonement. So the problem he had was the owners did the Koyanim did not eat from it. You could say the verses, but you didn't physically bring a sacrifice. The Koyanim didn't have the ability to eat. They weren't able to eat from it. So the thing is that when Mashiach comes, he says, I'll bring the actual sacrifice, and he even uses the term, I'm going to bring a chatos shmena. I'll bring a fattened chatos, which means a nice, delicious, really, in the olden days, the fatty meat was like the best because it was the most choicest, juiciest type. So he says, I'm going to bring a fattened chatos, which basically means I'm going to, in order to have the koyanim eat from it. That's the whole goal. Is I fulfill the obligation to bring the chatas of the sacrifice part, but the koyanim to eat from it, that causes the owners to be atoned. That I'm gonna do when Mashiach comes. I'm gonna bring a fattened chatas. Now on this, there's another interpretation of how to explain how to answer this reconcile the contradiction between our Gemara and the Gemara in Shabbos. The only thing is, there are other places where it mentions that even though the Koyanim eat from it and the owner gets atonement, but the conclusion is that even if the Kohanim do not eat from it, the owner still gets atonement. Now, if that's so, then why did Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha want to bring a korban chatos when Mashiach comes? If the owner should have gotten atonement anyway, because even though the Kohanim didn't eat from it, they still get atonement. So he shouldn't need to bring it. He brought his sacrifice. The Kohanim didn't eat from it. That's okay. It's fine. If they don't eat from it, you still get atonement. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. So how does this interpretation work over here? So I think it could be answered that the potential that the Kohanim eat from it, that potential allows the owners to have atonement. If it's fitting to eat from it. Here you just said verses. The Kohanim have nothing to eat from. So here you actually would need to, maybe here in this scenario where you're only saying verses of a sacrifice, it's as if you brought the sacrifice, but the Kohanim have no potential to eat from it if you just say verses. Here you actually need to bring a sacrifice in order for the owner to gain a total, because you need to actually bring it in order for the Kohanim to eat from it so that they at least potentially could eat from it in order for you to be able to have atonement. So that's seemingly the meaning of this interpretation. Okay, so anyway, bottom line is that we see the power of saying the verses for the sacrifices, and how it's as if you brought the sacrifice. Very important to recite those preliminary prayers in the davening. Now, the next Gemara brought a brisa, and the brisa mentioned, very interesting, that the Ma'amadais, in other words, the people of the Maimad, uses the word Anshe Mishmar, but really it means the people of the Maimad. They would daven. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what it means. They would daven, of course, that the sacrifices would be accepted, and the people that were not going to Yerushalayim, those Maimad people, they would go to their shuls and they would daven for and fast for 4 days. We spoke about there's different opinions if the ones that worked in Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash, if they also fasted. Now, the way I translated it is based on the Bach. The Bach, explains it this way: that we're talking about the two types of Anshe Maimon, the ones that are in Yerushalayim, and the ones that are the ones that are in Yerushalayim, and the ones that are in their cities. And number 2 in the Bach, if you want to look there. So so anyway, the bottom line is that the Maimad people who were in the cities, they would fast for 4 days, and they would have in mind on each day for a different type of scenario that I guess was very common, and they would pray for them. So the first thing that I think is important to mention is when we say Ritzeh in our davening, our Ritzeh is really the prayer. Seemingly, it's the prayer that the Ma'amados used to recite in Yerushalayim. The ones, the Israelites that were in Yerushalayim, or according to some opinions, it's Israelites, Levites, and Kohanim in Yerushalayim, they would say that Ritzeh prayer. Where does our Ritzeh prayer come from? That's the prayer that Hashem should Hashem should accept our prayers willingly. And in the Beis Hamikdash, it would be accept our korban willing. That was what they davened for. They davened for the korban sheyiskabel b'rotzon. That's seemingly, again, that doesn't say it anywhere, but that's seemingly our prayer. It's that's what it is. Now, then the Gemara mentions that the people who didn't go.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what about the Ritzay that we say on Shabbos for a bracha achrona? Or benching? Is there a Ritzay in benching?
Benching. Uh-huh. You have to think about it. But it's asking Hashem to to accept our resting on Shabbos. Anyway, yeah, I have to think about it. But anyway, the people in Yerushalayim, they would pray for other not the people in Yerushalayim, people in the shuls, the representatives in the shuls, so they would pray for other popular things. What were the things they prayed for? So they prayed. It says on Monday, they would pray for the people who traveled by sea. He says connected to the Monday creation, because on Monday, Yihirakia b'seich hamayim. So we have to ask Hashem to save us. That's when the waters, the upper waters, the lower waters were separated. So it's a time to pray for the people who are traveling by sea. On Tuesday, it was a time to pray for people who are traveling in the desert, and that's based on the fact that the Seirah Yabasha, there was dry land. Then on Wednesday, and again, these are in corresponding to the creation of the world. Each day somehow corresponds to what was created on that day. And on Wednesday, it says Hashem hanged up the sun and the moon and the stars. Hashem put it in its place, in its orbit. And so the word ma'orais is also me'erais, the curse, that seems that there was some type of a terrible type of tragic things would happen on Wednesday, that kids would have croup and they wouldn't be able to breathe, and so we would daven for children. They shouldn't have this askara. The Hebrew term is askara, and then and that's connected to this me'oros, which is the same word as same letters as me'eros. And on Thursday they would daven for the ubros and menikos, which is the pregnant women and the nursing women, that they should be able to nurse, and they should be able to not to miscarry and nurse their children. And that's connected to Thursday, which is that there should be life, and connected to Yishritzu Hamayim Sheretz Nefesh Chaya. So it's the concept of life, that there should be life. Now, Yishritzu Sheretz Nefesh Chaya. So, and then the Gemara says on Friday they wouldn't fast because of Kavod Shabbos, and Shabbos itself they wouldn't fast, and on Sunday we had different opinions. We have because of the Noitzrim, which is the Christians. We have because it's the third day of creation for a man, so he's weak on Sunday. There's a weakness. And the Reish Lakish said because of the Neshama Yisera, we have an extra soul on Shabbos, and it's taken away after Shabbos. And basically, because of that, we don't fast on Motzei Shabbos. In other words, it's the soul is we just lost our soul, and so it wouldn't be healthy for us to fast on Motzei Shabbos. So the It's a certain weakness that we have. Yeah. So we can't fast on Motzi Shabbos. All right. So I just wanted to mention here, there's a little discussion. I mentioned yesterday, really, that just because Adam Harishon was created, Adam was created on Friday. So Adam was weak on Shabbos, on Sunday, excuse me. He was weak on Sunday because Sunday was the third day of his creation. He was created on Friday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday he's weak, couldn't fast. Okay, don't fast on Sunday, no problem. Adam shouldn't fast on Sunday after he created. What about the week after? Is he still weak on Sunday? He was created a week ago. It's not the third day. And what about us? Are we Adam? We can't fast on Sunday just because Adam on the third day that he was created, he couldn't fast because it was Sunday. So now today also, every Sunday we're weak because Adam was weak on the first Sunday he was created. What does this mean? So there is a famous Rashba that explains. I mentioned it really, that it seems from here that every creation, everything that was created, repeats itself, and the creation of each item, there's some strength to it on that day that it was created. And I'll give you an example brought down about this idea. The Gemara mentions that there were two rabbis who every Friday they would create a igla tilsa. They would create this delicious calf from the Sefer Yetzirah, from the book of formation, which is a Kabbalistic book. And every Friday, they would create this animal that they would eat and enjoy on Shabbos. I mean, we're dealing with holy, holy people that had the power to do tremendous miracles. And so they would create this animal on Friday, and they would have it for Shabbos. It's delicious, the most expensive meat. Now, the thing is that they weren't able to do this for other holidays. They did it for Shabbos. Why is that? Because they were able to link in to the element of creation on Friday, which is created animals. Hashem created the animals on Friday. Because he created the animals on Friday, created man on Friday as well. They created animals, and creating the element of creation that repeats itself on Friday, they were able to do that again on any Friday, because there's a repetition in creation, the way things were created. There's a strength to the creation of those items every single week when it repeats itself. Now, we know, of course, everything is recreated every second, but there's an element of the way Hashem created the world that repeats itself every single week. On that day of creation, that there's some element of the creation. There's some sense of that creation that's repeating itself. And therefore, even for us, Sunday is a day that we are a little weaker. So it would be harder for us to fast on a Sunday than a different day of the week, because we have a certain part of us is certain, in some way we are being created on Friday. I guess you could say recreated on Friday, and makes that Sunday is the third day of creation for us. We're weaker, and therefore fasting on Sunday, the rabbis discouraged it. They said don't make an official fast on Sunday. There is a very interesting discussion as well. Many of you have heard of the Golem of Prague. The Golem of Prague was a famous story, maybe a legend, maybe true, But the Maharal of Prague, the story goes that the Maharal created this individual who was a robot, and it had some element of life to it. This is before electricity and other types of robotic ways of doing things. And he created the first robot, it seemed to have some type of life to it, because he used the Sefer Yetzirah, or the Zohar. He used some holy book to create it from Kabbalistic mystical ways, and he created it. This individual who would roam the streets and save the Jewish people from blood libels. So one of the commentary, one of the big great halachic authorities questioned if you're allowed to use someone like that for a minion. If you create a human being. So he had this thought that maybe they could be considered Jewish and they could be counted for a minion, especially if you bring the person up, as it says, Megadel ben chaveroi kilo yolda. If you bring up a child of your friend, it's as if you gave birth to him, so it's considered like your child, and maybe it's considered Jewish. It sounds a little surprising, but this is brought in the Chacham Tzvi's code of law questions. Like, he has a thought that maybe such a person could be counted for a minion. So the question that some of the later commentaries ask on this is, there's a famous story in the Gemara where Rabbi Eliezer needed a minion, and they only had 9 people, so he had a servant, and a servant is not considered fully Jewish until he's freed. When he's freed, he's a ben chayrin, then he's counted for a minion. Now, a servant goes through a semi-gerus process, a semi-conversion process, but he's not fully Jewish. He has to keep mitzvahs like not like a man. He doesn't have to do tefillin and doesn't have to keep all the mitzvahs. But when he's freed, then it kicks in, his conversion kicks in, and he becomes fully Jewish. And Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave in order to have a minion. The Rush on that Gemara, one of the commentaries says that was Parshas Zachar. It was Shabbos, and Parshas Zachar, he needed a minion in order to say Parshas Zachar, a biblical obligation to remember and blot out the name of Amalek. According to the Rush, that's a biblical obligation, and that's why he freed his slave. And the Gemara asks questions how you're allowed to free a slave. There's other verses that say you're not. There's a verse that says you're not allowed to free a slave. They're supposed to work for you forever, and you're not supposed to. So the Gemara explains that it's a mitzvah. It's a special mitzvah. It's a big mitzvah, and you're allowed to free a slave for a minion. So the question is, why did Rabbi Eliezer need to free his slave? He could have created a golem. If he created a golem, he would have a minion, right? According to Chacham Tzvi, if that's true, that you could create that a golem might be Jewish, so why didn't he do that? Why didn't he just create a golem? Why do you have to free a slave? It's also a big expense. I would think a slave is a very expensive thing that you lose all that money for. But the Gemara is asking more for the fact that it's prohibited. I mean, the commentaries are asking it's prohibited to free a slave. You need to come up with a heter to free a slave. Why didn't you just create a golem? So the thing is, especially Rabbi Eliezer, who was able to make bas koil's heavenly voices, he could have done anything. Rabbi Eliezer, to make a golem for him was nothing. The Maharal, used the Sefer Yetzirah. The Rabbi Eliezer from the Gemara, he could have created a golem not like this. And so the understanding is, so based on what we're explaining, it wasn't Friday. You want to make a golem? You can make a golem on a Friday, because Friday is the day of creation of man. That's the day that you're able to link in and recreate and create a golem. But if it wasn't a Friday, he wouldn't have been able to create a golem. That's why he had to free his slave. So in other words, according to this understanding of the Rashba, which explains our Gemara a little of why we are weak on Sunday, because that creation repeats itself. So you have the same understanding here as well with the fact that the creation of certain things, even if you know all the mystical elements, but it goes in connection with the fact that that's the day of creation, and on the day of that day of creation, that's when you're able to maybe to create these type of things. Anyway, the bottom line is that our Gemara says that there's some weakness that we have on Sunday because Adam was created on Friday. We are weak on Sunday, and the rabbis didn't want to establish a fast day for the Ma'amados. The Gemara that we're up to, so we're up to this Gemara of Reish Lakish, who says there's an Neshama Yesera. The Neshama Yesera on Shabbos, we're must be about 20 lines up from the bottom of the page. The Amar Reish Lakish. Let's see, 5, 10. Now maybe about 15 lines up from the bottom of the page on page 27b. 27b, and if you're in the art scroll, it's 27b. 27b2. 27b2. On the first column, maybe like the third or fourth paragraph, Reish Lakish Amar, Reish Lakish says, "Mipnei neshama yesera." You know why you can't fast on a Sunday? Because there's an extra soul that you had on Shabbos. Damar Reish Lakish says, "Neshama yesera nitna by ba'adar erev Shabbos." On erev Shabbos, even before Shabbos comes in, the person gets his extra soul. I think I once saw written somewhere that it's when you say, well, it doesn't seem to fit with this, but I think I once saw somewhere where it says that the extra soul comes in when you say in the Ma'ariv prayer, Ufreis aleinu sukas shleimecha. When you say that final sentence before the blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem, Perisok Shalom Aleinu Al Kalam Yisrael Yishalayim, the Esrei of the Ma'ariv, that that's why we stand, Ufreis aleinu. I think I once saw such a thing. Our Gemara says that the Neshama Yesera comes on Erev Shabbos. So it sounds like it's before Shabbos kicks in, it's already there. And I might have heard from someone that it's when you go to the mikvah on Erev Shabbos. That's when you get the Neshama Yesera. Yes, Isaac, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. So anyway, the Gemara here seems to say it comes on Erev Shabbos. It's interesting. There's a Lubavitch minhag to stand on Friday night before the Kaddish. You know, everyone stands for Kaddish before Shmona Esrei on Ma'ariv. But the Lubavitch minhag is to stand 2 sentences before that, Ufreis aleinu. Now, I don't know where I saw this, maybe in a Sephardic siddur or somewhere where it said, like it gave a little insight, Ufreis aleinu, here you get the extra neshama. I saw it in some siddur where it says here you get that. So I was thinking maybe that's why in Lubavitch they stand for Ufreis aleinu, because maybe the neshama, the extra neshama comes then. But anyway, our Gemara says it comes on Erev Shabbos. It sounds like it's before Shabbos, and maybe the mikvah, maybe that's a source of going to the mikvah on Erev Shabbos. Maybe that's because maybe that's when the extra neshama comes. Not that if people don't go to mikvah, they don't get it, but maybe it's a way of bringing in the extra neshama at an earlier time instead of just a few minutes or a minute before Shabbos. Maybe it comes even earlier. I don't know if anyone has anything to share about this. Anyone know anything about this? Okay, that's not. But anyway, it says that we get this extra neshama on Erev Shabbos in B'motzei Shabbos night l'noisam imenu. Motzei Shabbos, it gets taken away. And Rashi adds the word v'havi cholosh, and you'll be weak. We gets taken away. We lose it. Shenemar, as it says, Shabbos v'yinafash, he rested and he was refreshed. And the the Gemara expounds on this word vayinafash. It says, or both words, Shavas, Kivan Shavas, once the Shabbos is over, once he rested and he finished, so vayinafash, Vai of the nefesh. The word vayinafash comes from three words. Vai of the nefesh. Oi, vai. Whoa, the soul is lost. It's done. It's finished. So that's the word of vayinafash. So kivan sheshavas, since he rested on Shabbos, he rested and he kept Shabbos. After Shabbos is over, it's vayinafash. So it's a little play on the word vayinafash, that it's vay of the nefesh, the soul is gone. Basically, we are now weak, and that's why the rabbis did not want the people of the Maimad to fast on Sunday, because we don't have the soul. And I believe some say that's the reason for, or maybe that's or maybe it's one of the reasons for the smelling the besamim, is to like comfort ourselves after we smell the spices, to comfort ourselves after losing our soul, our neshama yasera, this extra soul. Like we have some extra element of strength, of energy, of spirituality on Shabbos, and then we lost it, so we smell the besamim. But anyway, the Gemara basically tells us that there's three reasons why not to fast on Sunday. It doesn't mean that you can't fast on Sunday. It means why the rabbis didn't establish a fast for the Ma'amadais on every Sunday. Of course, we do fast on some Sundays. We even fast on Fridays for Asar B'Tevis. Sometimes falls on a Friday, we fast. And Sundays, very often, Tisha B'Av and Shivas B'Tammuz, they fall on Sunday. So it's not that we never fast on Sunday, but the rabbis didn't establish the fasts of the Ma'amadais to be on Sunday. Okay. The Gemara continues and says, B'yom Rishon Bereshis V'yehi Rakia. So now we're getting into the actual paragraphs of what the reading of the Torah that they would read at the Ma'amadais. When they would go to the shul, they would go to their shul, they would read these Ma'amadais, they would read these from the Torah, from these this creation of the world, and each day they read what was connected to that day of creation. So on B'yom Rishon, on the Sunday, they would read Bereshis V'yehi Rakia. They would read Bereshis from the beginning, and the Bereshis Bara Elokim, and they would also read the portion called Yehi Rakia, which is a few verses after that, verses 6 to 8, Yehi Rakia, and ultimately that was what they read on the first day of creation. I'm sorry, on the Sunday. They read what was on the first day of creation and what was on the second day of creation. They read the 2 days of creation on Sunday. Basically don't have enough verses in the first day of creation, so they would include the second day of creation as well. Tana, we learned, or was taught in a brisa, Tana taught in a brisa, Bereshis B'Shnayim. Bereshis, the first paragraph. See, the Torah is divided into paragraphs. Not necessarily is it the paragraphs that the English translation of the Chumash uses. They might divide it up their way. But the paragraphs in the actual Torah are based on if you look sometimes in the Hebrew, there's a pei or a samech at the end of each paragraph in the Torah. And that shows the sefer, the scribe, how exactly the paragraph is supposed to end. Some paragraphs have to have a space in between it for the next paragraph. Some paragraphs end in the middle of the line, and it ends in the middle of the line. It ends at the end of the line. You can start the new paragraph sometimes in the end of the line that the previous line was the end of one paragraph, and in the same line you could start the new paragraph. So there's certain rules about it. It's called a psucha and a stuma. That there's the paragraphs that start with an opening, with a space, or they don't have that space. But ultimately, there's a way in the Torah of seeing which paragraphs that there's a new paragraph. So here, Bereshis is the first paragraph. That's talking about day one. Then you have another paragraph for day two, and that's Yehirakia. And the Bereshis paragraph was recited by two people that were called up to the Torah. The first one did the first half. The second one did the second half. Now, but it's not so simple. Why is it not so simple? Because every person is supposed to read 3 verses. So if the first one did the first half of Bereshis, the second one did the second half of Bereshis, so you would think that there's 6 verses, so you're all set, right? But it's not true. There's only 5 verses, so we're going to have to deal with that. In the meantime, 2 people read Bereshis. Yirakia is be'echad, but the Yirakia paragraph, which was only 3 verses, 6, 7, and 8, that was done by one person. One person was called up to read that. In the olden days, I should mention, they did not have what we call a Baal Koirei, a reader who reads the Torah. The way it worked in the olden days is you called someone up to the Torah. That person who gets the Aliyah, who gets called up, he reads also. He does the Baruch Hu, Es Hashem Hamvorach, and he reads the actual Torah. So here the term, although of course it's permitted to do what we do, but that wasn't the custom. Now, of course, came a time when people didn't know the whole Torah, so you couldn't call people up and expect them to read. So they this institution of having a Baal Koireh read is because we needed it. We need to have someone who knows, prepares and is well prepared. But the initial way of reading the Torah was people would get called up. They would just read. So it says the Bereshis is Bishnayim and Yehirakia is Biechad. Gemara asks, Bishlam Yehirakia, it's good. It's understandable. It's fine. It's good. Yehirakia, that paragraph is Biechad. It's with one person because Tlasa Psukin in Uhavu. There's 3 verses. No problem. You have 3 verses. A person reads 3 verses when they get called up to the Torah, so they're all set. That Yehirakia paragraph is a perfect paragraph. Elo Bereshis, Bishnayim, Bereshis with 2 people, hey Psuki Havyan, it's only 5 verses. So how are you going to handle calling 2 people up with only 5 verses? And Hakaira and the Gemara brings a brisa, the Tanya. We learned in a brisa that Hakaira b'Torah al yivchais megillah psukim. A person who reads the Torah is not supposed to read less than 3 verses. When a person gets called up to the Torah, they would read at least 3 verses. So if each one is going to read 3 verses, you need to have 6 verses to read Bereshis paragraph. And if there's only 5 verses in the Bereshis paragraph, logically what they should do is have one person read it, not have 2 people. Because
you do what you do Rosh Chodesh.
So that's the next piece of Gemara. But the logical thing to do, without knowing that you could play games, is, in other words, that without knowing that there's some loophole, is that you would have, if you have a 5-verse paragraph, the logical thing to do is you have one person read it. The only problem is we want there to be 3 people called up to the Torah, and we want to only read these first 2 paragraphs. So the Gemara says that Rav Omar, Rav says, Doile. Rav says, you know what you do? You jump back. You leap back and you skip back to the verse that was read already, and you reread it. And that's what we do. This is Isaac's idea. We reread it just like we do Rosh Chodesh. So you reread one of the verses. So the first person was called up to the Torah, read 3 verses. The next person gets called up to the Torah, starts at the 3rd verse that the other one read already, and he reads it again. And he reads verse 3, 4, and 5. And then you have 2 people getting called up to the Torah with only 5 verses, and it's not a problem. So that's what Rav's opinion is. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Poisik, you know what you're allowed to do is stop in the middle of a verse. You stop and you cut the verse in half, The first person who gets called up to the Torah reads 2.5 verses, and the next person who gets called up to the Torah reads another 2.5 verses. In other words, he starts in the middle, he continues for the next half a verse and 2 more verses, and that's considered a option, at least in the last resort. You have no other choice. Taisa says an interesting thing over here. He says, did you ever think of why on Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, what do? We read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, the end. In other words, the maftir. We read Rosh Chodesh. What about if it's a holiday? So on the holiday, of course, there's special readings for the holidays. And then the end, you read all about the paragraph about that holiday, the sacrifices of that holiday. The end, and the maftir reads the extra stuff. He says, why don't we do that for Shabbos? Why don't we every Shabbos we're reading the Torah? The maftir should read the portion of Shabbos. He says, you know why? Because Shabbos only has 2 verses. Shabbos only has 2 verses to it, the paragraph of Shabbos. He says, because of that, when he talks about the sacrifice, talking about the sacrifice of Shabbos, it's only 2 verses. And because it's actually right before Rosh Chodesh, it's right before the paragraph about Rosh Chodesh sacrifices. So because Shabbos only has two verses, you can't do it. You need at least 3 verses. So Taisa says, well, why don't you just add a little before it? Add from nope. He says the previous paragraph is not connected. If it's not connected, we can't do it. It has to be connected in order to start earlier. And Taisa says, in for the same reason, you can't add whenever we're stuck. You can't add before. His example, let me just pull it up over here. Taisa says, on Rosh Chodesh, where we have this problem, he says, why don't you just read before it? He says, you can't do that. He says, it only works when you're reading something that is connected, like Re'eh, he says. Even though, the portion of Re'eh is read on Shabbos Chol HaMoed. Shabbos Chol HaMoed, we do something like that. We have a paragraph that we want to read for Shabbos Chol HaMoed. It's in the portion of Re'eh Ata Imar Eli. It's not the portion of Ray. It starts with the words Ray. Excuse me. It starts with Ray Ata Imar Eli in Parshas Kisisa. He says, but that's not really what we're interested in reading. We're really interested in reading a paragraph after that. He says, but it's no problem because that's connected. He's reading the whole discussion, it was all interrelated. It's talking about one thing over there. So that's okay on Shabbos Chol HaMoed when you read that whole the whole story of of Moshe and his discussion with Hashem, of being able to see Hashem, the cleft of the rock, and so on. And so that's all connected. But he says, Rosh Chodesh, you can't just jump and do a verse before it. That wouldn't work. And he says the same reason would apply to Shabbos. Number one, Shabbos is only 2 verses. And then you want to say, because I'll read another verse before it? You can't. Because that's not the same inyan. It's not the same, it's out of context. And so that's this top Tosfos over here. It discusses that. It's just an interesting bit of information if you ever wondered about that, about not reading the portion of Shabbos on every Shabbos. But we do it for Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos. We do it for Yontiv, but we don't do it for Shabbos. And the one time when we do go earlier, he says, if it's the same inyan, then you could start earlier, and that would be Shabbos Chol Hamoed. Now,
we say it at Musaf. I'm saying we say it at Musaf.
we do.
Karbanos, right?
But that's no problem. You're not reading the Torah. You're not getting called up to the Torah. Of course, yeah. We say it in Musaf. We mention it. So you're saying it's as if we brought it. Right. That's right. It's as if we brought it. But the actual reading of the Torah, which normally would be done, it's not done that way because you can't. Because now our Gemara tells us these two options of how to the Ma'amados to use 5 psukim and be able to call up 2 people within 5 psukim. So we have Rab's way of doing it, which is the way seemingly we do it when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, because we have the same problem on Rosh Chodesh, a similar problem that there's not enough verses there. We call up 4 people on every Rosh Chodesh, and so how do you have 4 people in those two in the portion of Rosh Chodesh? And so that's how it's done. Is we basically our doileg, we repeat one of the verses, and the first one reads verse 1, 2, 3. The second one reads verse 3, 4, 5. That's how you have two people called up, even though there's only 5 verses. Now, Gemara wants to know, why does this rabbi not follow that view, and why does that rabbi not follow this view? Meaning Shmuel says you could split the verse in half, and one reads one half, and the other reads the other half, and that's considered like 3 verses. So you actually like make another verse, make it into like as if it's 6 verses. So the Gemara says, Rav Damar Doilig, my time will place it. Rav that says you could go back and leap backwards and repeat. Thank you. Why doesn't he hold that you could cut the verse in half? Why doesn't he say like Shmuel? He holds that any verse that was not cut by Moshe, we don't cut it, we don't divide it. If it wasn't divided by Moshe that way, in other words, the end of each verse is set up by Moshe, by Hashem. But it means Moshe was the one who actually wrote it, but dictated by Hashem. But it says any verse that was not divided by Moshe, meaning from dictation from Hashem, we don't divide it. Now, Shmuel, so what about Shmuel? Shmuel Amar Paisik, and Shmuel says you can split it. Umi Paskinan, are you allowed to? Could we do that? Rab Chanina, didn't Rab Chanina say, Rab Chanina Kara, Rab Chanina Kara is the Rab Chanina, the scripture expert, the expert, the Rab Chanina, the Balkaire almost, like the Kra expert, the biblical expert. Tsar Gadol Hayali Yitzchok Chanina Gadol. It was very painful that for Rabbi Chanina, the great, in other words, there's 2 people with Rabbi Chanina, so it's giving adjectives to who they were. The first is Rabbi Chanina Kara, and the second one is Rabbi Chanina Hagadol. So the Rabbi Chanina Kara said, I had a big problem. I had to get a heter. It was very painful for Rabbi Chanina Hagadol to give me a heter. He only permitted me a heter. He gave me a leniency. He gave me a permit that I was allowed to divide a verse, to stop in the middle and translate for the students who they couldn't read the whole verse at once. So because of that, we were able to I got a heter from him to divide the verse into parts, maybe not to translate, maybe even just to read. Actually, he got a heter, a permit to divide these. So he was a expert at reading and the girsa and the taimeha, the trup, the tune. And he said it was very hard. He had to get like a permit for me so that I could teach the students that aren't able to read the whole pasuk, so they could do half. So it sounds like you need a major heter to be able to split a verse in half. So how are you doing this in a way? You're reading it in the synagogue for the Ma'amadas, and you're just no problem, just dividing the pasuk. I got a whole heter to do this. It was because of kids. They can't handle the whole pasuk. So we have to we're able to teach them to read, and because I'm teaching them to read, it was permitted. But you can't do this, Shmuel. So he says, Hayil. I'm sorry. So Shmuel, I don't know if I said those words. Hayil ula Islamed asuyan. The reason why it was permitted was because this is the way they needed to teach it. They needed to teach it in different parts, and therefore it was permitted. But Shmuel, what is Shmuel going to do with that? So the Gemara says, Hasam time he says, what's the reason over there? Why do you need to divide it? You need to divide it. Mishum de loyefsha. There's no other way to teach them. So Achanami loyefsha. Here also Shmuel says there's no other option. How do you read 5 verses for 2 people? It says no other option. You have to divide it, and you have to divide it in half. Why doesn't he say to reread it? Ushmuel Amr Paisek, my time Amr Dudley. Why doesn't he follow Rab's way of doing it? Just repeat it. Go back and repeat it. So he says, Gzeira mishamanach nosin mishamay yoitzin. I don't want to do that because there's a decree. As a decree that I don't want people who enter in the middle of the Torah reading, and they're gonna come late, and they're gonna think that the previous guy only read 2 verses. People who leave early, they're gonna think that the next guy is only reading 2 verses. So this way, I divide it in the middle. We have 3 verses and 3 verses. So that's that's so far where we're up to in this dialogue. Okay, we'll have to stop here.
Before we leave,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Can we start a discussion about the next book to read?
Tractate, yeah, that's a good idea. I was thinking of doing Sukkah. Does anyone want to learn Tractate Sukkah?
Sukkah's good. Why not? You want to read it eventually, right? No, it gets really complicated. It becomes a real math puzzle later. Oh, well, that's why we have you. Missing and filling, it's great.
What about Pesachim?
You're a masochist. Okay, then we'll do it. All right.
What about Pesachim, Rabbi, since we're coming up on Pesach?
Well, it's not going to help us for this year Pesach, but you're saying maybe for next year Pesach. Now, we're going to hopefully finish Taanis maybe before, right up to Pesach, maybe right after Pesach this year. So we'll finish, but the Pesachim, so you're saying maybe for next year. Pesachim has a lot of kudshim in it, and tumah and tahara. But yeah, that's an idea. Is that what your vote would be, Ezra? You want to do Pesachim?
I don't know. I'll do whatever you want to do. That's fine. You
remind me when Rabbi Shapiro started his nightly shir. We started with Megillah, and he was determined. It was 30 days before Purim. He was going to finish it by Purim. So we finished it by Purim. I remember I looked up and I said, don't think of doing Pesachim in time for Pesach.
Rabbi.
Yes, David.
I looked up croup.
Yeah.
We were talking about before in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
It's the official name is laryngeal tracheobronchitis. It used to be very common, and it used to be fatal, frequently fatal. But since vaccines, especially the diphtheria vaccine, it's very rare now.
So it's connected to diphtheria. Interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
I've seen them in the hospital put a tent,
a shell around the room,
or a tent around the child, and they put oxygen.
And it's probably contagious.
Right. All right. Before we divert, can we decide which tractate we're going to? I want to go and find the book. Why do we have to decide today?
He wants to buy it. He wants to start buying.
I want to buy it. I want to start looking for it in the internet. You know what? Get them all. Get them all in your bound. You better get them all in your bound. I don't have enough money to get all of them. Okay.
Tell Art Scroll to make it cheaper, Isaac.
Right.
We can do that.
Yeah.
But,
they got it down
anyone,
like
they have the travel edition, which is smaller.
The travel edition is about $1,200. I can't read it. It's too small for me. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone else have a thought? Mordechai, do you have any preference?
I think we should discuss it tomorrow.
Yeah, Sukkot's
Rabbi.
okay with me.
Avram,
Sukkot is fine with me, you know.
You can
Moshe,
buy
Avram.
this. You can buy
Sleep
this
on it.
Steinsaltz. You can buy the Steinsaltz online for $10.
Right. Anyway, whatever. People like to have an actual book, but all right, David, you have any preference? Masechta? Anyone else?
Sukkot,
Jay?
because it's all about learning more shade than
less-
sunlight and amot and skach and you know, that's makes
You
it
want
it's very
sukkah?
interesting. Sukkot, yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
want sukkah? Uh-huh.
It's very
Yeah,
practical.
I'm always interested in that. It's very good. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so,
actually very practical.
Right.
all right.
And also
Okay.
the things you learn, good eye, the whole business of making up for space or
Okay,
filling in space is a very interesting subject.
So can we have a consensus that we'll go for Sukkot? Is that okay with everybody?
You're gonna
That's
order
sounds good.
today no matter what.
Okay,
Sounds good.
okay.
Seems like everyone wants it. Okay,
All right.
very good.
Good.
So that's
Thank
the
you,
plan.
everyone.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you,
for,
everybody.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Rabbi.
See you soon.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.